My mother-in-law falsely reported me to CPS because I wouldn't name my daughter after her, but her report completely backfired, and now the police are after her. When I was 7 months pregnant, Grant's mother Yolanda announced that every woman in her family for 3 generations had been named Yolanda, and my daughter would be the 4th. I told her Grant and I had already chosen Wren. She laughed and said that wasn't a real name, it sounded like a bird. I said we were keeping it. She said she would just call the baby by her real name once she arrived. At my baby shower, she stood up during the gifts and told the room she hoped this child would carry on the family name, staring right at me. My aunt said Yolanda was only excited. After Wren was born, Yolanda came to the hospital, looked down at her, and said hello little Yolanda in a soft voice, like she hadn't heard me correct her a dozen times. For months, every visit, she called the baby Yolanda or sweet girl, never Wren. I asked her directly to stop. She said she wasn't doing anything wrong. Grant told her the same thing separately, and she told him I was controlling and grandmothers had rights too. When Wren was 4 months old, Grant's sister Kelly called and said Yolanda had been crying to her, saying I was cutting her out of Wren's life over a name. I said it wasn't small to me. Kelly asked why I couldn't just let Yolanda use the name as a nickname if it made her happy. I said my daughter's name was Wren. Kelly sighed and said I was being stubborn and making the whole family choose sides. A few days later, my cousin messaged me saying she'd heard I wouldn't let Yolanda see the baby, which was never true. Every week there was a new voice telling me I was too sensitive about a name, when none of them had to correct someone every time they spoke to their own child. When Wren turned 6 months, Yolanda started showing up unannounced, saying she just wanted to see her granddaughter since nobody cared about family traditions. I told her to call first. She said I was keeping her granddaughter from her on purpose. One evening she called and asked why the front door was locked when she stopped by. I told her we weren't home, which was exactly why she should call first. She said something felt off in that house and she had a bad feeling about how Wren was being raised. I didn't think much of it. 2 weeks later, a caseworker showed up at our door. She said her office had received a report claiming Wren was being neglected, left with unsafe caregivers, her basic needs unmet. My hands shook as I let her in. She walked through the house, checked Wren's room, looked in the refrigerator, and asked us a long list of questions. Wren was clean, fed, and napping peacefully the whole time. The caseworker said everything looked fine, but she had to complete a full review since a report had been filed. Over the next 3 weeks, we had 2 more visits, more questions, and a review of Wren's pediatric records. Every visit found nothing. Grant asked directly who filed the report. She said she couldn't share that unless the investigation showed false intent. The whole time, Yolanda kept texting like nothing was happening, asking when she could see little Yolanda again. I told her we were dealing with something serious. She said families should support each other during hard times, not shut each other out. The final visit came a month after the first. The caseworker sat with us and said the case was closed. No findings of neglect or abuse. Then she said that because filing a knowingly false report to Child Services is something her office refers for legal review, she was required to note who filed it. She said someone who knowingly files a false report can face real penalties under state law. She said the name on the report was Yolanda, listed as the baby's grandmother. Grant and I looked at each other and everything clicked. Every unannounced visit, every comment about something feeling off, every guilt trip about tradition. It wasn't concern, it was a setup, built so that when she made the call, she could say she'd been worried for months. Grant looked like he'd been punched in the chest. I told him we wouldn't call her, wouldn't text her, wouldn't do anything until we talked to someone who could lay out our legal options. I found a family attorney that night and booked a consultation for the morning. Yolanda had no idea we knew, and I wanted to keep it that way. The attorney explained that filing a knowingly false report to Child Protective Services is a misdemeanor that can carry fines and, in some cases, jail time. She asked me to walk her through everything, so I did. From the name to the unannounced visits, to the comments about the house, to the investigation that found nothing. She said the fact that the caseworker had documented the report as unfounded was already on record, and combined with a pattern of harassment building to a false report, we had a strong case. She recommended filing a police report right away and considering a restraining order. Grant had been quiet the whole meeting, elbows on his knees, jaw working. When she asked if we wanted to move forward, he said, "She's my mother, but she went after my daughter. File everything." His voice didn't crack. After we left, I started pulling together evidence. I screenshotted every text where Yolanda called the baby Yolanda, dozens of them. I saved the messages from Kelly saying Yolanda had been crying that I was cutting her out. I pulled up the message from Paula accusing me of not letting Yolanda see the baby. I wrote out a timeline by hand, every unannounced visit with dates, the evening she tried the locked door, the Saturday she appeared without calling, the nap she interrupted and got upset about. I put it in a folder and sent copies to the attorney. She called back and said this was exactly what she needed, a clear pattern of escalating behavior that led straight to the false report. She said it wasn't one bad decision, it was a campaign. Hearing that made me feel like I wasn't crazy, like everything I'd noticed actually mattered. While we were assembling all this, Yolanda texted Grant like nothing was wrong. His phone buzzed on the counter and I saw the preview. It said she hadn't heard from us and hoped we weren't still upset about the name thing, and she'd love to come see little Yolanda that weekend. She was still calling her Yolanda after filing a CPS report after a month of investigations. Grant read it and set the phone down without a word. I saved it and sent it to the attorney, who said it showed zero remorse and a judge would see that. That night, I found Grant sitting on the couch in the dark. He said, "I keep thinking about all the times she said she had a bad feeling about this house. She was building her story." I'd been thinking the same thing. Neither of us slept much that night, both of us lying awake running the same loop. Every visit, every offhand comment, every warning she'd planted in the family like a seed. He rubbed his face and said he didn't want Wren to ever know her grandmother did this. I told him she wouldn't have to, because we were going to make sure Yolanda couldn't do it again. He was grieving, not just angry, because the mother he thought he had didn't exist. I didn't rush rush him, but I didn't slow down either. The next morning, we drove to the police station with the folder, the screenshots, the timeline, the attorney's notes, and the caseworker's findings. An officer read through the documentation, looked at the texts, went through the timeline, and asked when the visit started and whether Yolanda had made direct threats. I told him about the call where she said something felt off. Grant told him about every unannounced visit. The officer wrote it all down and said the CPS file alone gave them enough to open an investigation, and the rest supported it. He said the caseworker's written finding that the report was unfounded was the strongest piece we had because it was a neutral record made by someone with no stake in the outcome. He said cases like this usually fell apart on he said, she said, but a documented investigation that turned up nothing changed everything. He told us not to contact Yolanda, to let the process work, and not give her anything she could use to claim harassment. He said the moment we reached out to her, even to defend ourselves, she'd twist it. So the smartest thing we could do was stay quiet and let the paperwork speak. I understood exactly what he meant. For months I'd been the one explaining, and every explanation had been turned into ammunition. Now the record would explain for me. Walking out, I felt something shift. For months I'd been the one correcting people, defending my choices, opening my door to caseworkers because of a report I knew was fake. Now someone with real authority could look at the evidence and say this was wrong. Yolanda had no idea the same system she tried to use against us was turning to face her. We had the report filed, the attorney working, and a paper trail a mile long, but I knew she wouldn't go quietly. She'd spent months turning family into her messengers, and I was done letting her control what people believed. Grant and I decided to tell Kelly and the rest of the family what actually happened, on our terms, with proof. No more secondhand stories. That Saturday, Ren down for her nap, we sat at the dining table with my phone on speaker and called Kelly. I told her to listen to everything before she said a word. I told her a caseworker had come to our door a month ago, that we'd had 3 home visits, people checking our refrigerator and our baby's room, and the case closed with no findings. Then I told her the caseworker said the person who filed the report was Yolanda, her mother, listed as grandmother. The line went silent. Then Kelly said, that can't be right. Mom wouldn't do that. She wasn't defending her on purpose. She just couldn't picture it. Grant leaned in and said, I was sitting right there when the caseworker told us. Mom's name is on the report. She lied. Kelly started reaching. Maybe someone used her name. Maybe she thought it was a wellness check. So I read the texts out loud. The one about something feeling off. The one about a bad feeling about how Ren was raised. The one about the locked door. I read the dates of every visit. I said, she wasn't worried, Kelly. She was building a story and she used it to call CPS on us. Kelly went quiet, and when she spoke, her voice cracked. She said she owed me an apology. She said Yolanda had called her crying and she'd believed every word, that she'd pushed me because Yolanda made her think I was the problem. Something loosened in my chest. Grant said, we're not angry at you. She fooled all of us. For a moment, it felt like the family might come back together around the facts. Then Kelly said, but you can't go to the police. She's our mother. She made a mistake. Can't you just set boundaries? The air went out of me. She just apologized, just admitted Yolanda used her, and now she was asking us to let it go. I said, Kelly, she reported us for child neglect. Caseworkers came 3 times. That's not a mistake. That's a weapon. She pushed harder, said Yolanda was an old woman who got carried away, and going to the police was extreme. Grant cut in, low and firm. What she did could have gotten Ren taken from us. There is nothing extreme about protecting my family. Kelly said she needed time to think, and hung up. I told Grant she'd tell Yolanda. He nodded and said, let her. Less than 2 hours later, Grant's phone rang. He put it on speaker. Yolanda wasn't crying this time. She was furious. She said Kelly told her we were trying to have her arrested over a phone call, over a concerned grandmother, and we should be ashamed. Grant said, Mom, you lied. You told CPS Ren was being neglected. That's not true. She fired back that she'd had every right to make that call, that something was wrong in that house, that I'd turned him against his family. She called me that woman, couldn't even say my name. I said, Ren was clean, fed, and healthy every time. You did this because we wouldn't name her after you. She snapped that I shouldn't dare reduce it to a name, that it was a grandmother's instinct. She wasn't denying the report anymore. She was saying she had every right, that she'd do it again. Grant said, a loving grandmother doesn't try to get her grandchild taken away. Then Yolanda said if we went through with this, we'd never hear from her again, and she'd make sure the whole family knew what kind of people we were. Grant looked at me. I nodded, and he said, that's your choice, Mom, and ended the call. Within an hour, my phone was going off. Paula texted that she'd talked to Yolanda and heard we were pressing charges against her for being worried about the baby, and that it was disgusting. That was Yolanda's version, not the false report, just a worried grandmother being punished. Anya left a voicemail saying the family had been through enough, and I should drop this before it went too far. No questions, no asking my side. Yolanda had started calling everyone the second she hung up, feeding them the story where she was the victim. I'd been waiting for it, which is why the message was already written. I'd put it together the night before. I sent it to Paula, to Anya, to Kelly, to everyone on Grant's side who had ever looked at me sideways because of something Yolanda said. It had the screenshots of her refusing to use Ren's name, the messages where Paula accused me of keeping the baby away, the messages where Kelly pressured me, the dates of every visit, and a plain explanation. I wrote that I wasn't asking anyone to pick sides, only showing what actually happened so nobody had to take anyone's word for it, that the caseworker had closed the case, the police had been informed, and we were protecting our daughter. Then I put the phone down and waited. Paula answered first about 20 minutes later. She said she'd had no idea, that Yolanda had told her a completely different story, and she was sorry for how she'd messaged me. She'd come at me hard before without ever asking what was going on, and now she was seeing every screenshot for herself. Anya didn't respond for hours. Late that evening, a short text came, just that she needed to process this. No apology, no defense, but at least she wasn't repeating Yolanda's version. Kelly called Grant around 9, quieter, less sure of herself. She said she'd read everything and wasn't going to defend Yolanda anymore, but she still asked if there was any way to handle this without the police. Grant Grant said, "It's already done, Kelly. We can't undo a police report, and we wouldn't if we could." She didn't push back. The family Yolanda had built into her personal army was reading the truth now, and one by one they were stepping back from her, not because I asked them to pick a side, but because the facts left no room for her version. Yolanda went silent for 3 days. Grant said it felt like the quiet before something bad. Our attorney said the officer had already reviewed the CPS file and our documentation, and it was likely Yolanda would be formally charged. On the 4th day, Kelly called, tight-voiced. She said Yolanda was telling everyone she was going to sue us for grandparent visitation rights, that she'd called a lawyer and claimed a case because we were keeping Ren from her. Grant didn't blink. He said, "She filed a false CPS report. No judge is going to give her visitation after that." Kelly said Yolanda was convinced she was the victim, telling Anya and Paula we were using the legal system to erase her, and some of the family was wavering again. I called the attorney. She said grandparent visitation petitions existed in our state, but the grandparent had to prove an existing significant relationship and that visitation served the child's best interest. Given the false report, the documented harassment, and the pending criminal investigation, she said any judge would see it for what it was, but Yolanda could still file, and we'd still have to respond. Even clearly in the wrong, she could drag us into a courtroom. Then the attorney said this was actually good for us, that it showed a pattern of using legal systems as weapons. First CPS, now a visitation petition, and it strengthened the restraining order significantly. An hour later, Anya called me directly for the first time ever. She said she'd read everything and believed me. Then she said Yolanda was falling apart, calling her sobbing that she'd never see Ren grow up, and asked if there was any middle ground. I said, "Anya." She called Child Protective Services and told them I was neglecting my daughter. There is no middle ground after that. She was quiet, then said I was right, and she wished it hadn't come to this. I said so did I, but Yolanda brought it here. Later, Paula sent a long message, a real apology this time, saying she should have asked me directly instead of taking Yolanda's word, that she hadn't known about the CPS report until I told everyone, that Yolanda had made it sound like I was just being mean about the name, and that she felt used. She was used. Yolanda had aimed her at me like a guided missile. I wrote back that she'd used everyone who loved her to make me look like the bad guy, that I didn't blame her for believing family, but now she knew the truth. That evening, the attorney called late, which she never did unless something moved. She said the police had completed their investigation and were moving forward with charges, that Yolanda would be formally charged with filing a false report to Child Protective Services. She'd also filed the restraining order petition and expected it granted quickly. Then she said the part I'll never forget, that once Yolanda was charged, any grandparent visitation petition she filed would be dead on arrival, because no family court judge grants visitation to someone with an active criminal case involving the same child. I told Grant everything. His face went through relief, sadness, anger, exhaustion, and then grief. He put his head in his hands, and when he looked up, his eyes were red. He said, "I never thought we'd be here." But she did this to herself. His mother was going to stand in front of a judge and answer for what she did, and that was right, but she was still his mother. 2 days later, Grant's phone started buzzing on the counter. Yolanda. He let it ring, 3 calls in a row, all to voicemail. Then my phone rang, and I watched it until it stopped. A voicemail came through. I expected screaming, but her voice was low and flat, rehearsed. She said she hoped I was happy, that I'd destroyed the family over a bird name, that her lawyer would be in touch, and when this was over, everyone would know what I really was. No crying, just a cold promise to keep fighting. I forwarded it to the attorney, who said to keep saving everything. The next morning, Kelly called, sounding like she hadn't slept. She said Yolanda had shown up at her house the night before with no warning and sat in her living room for 2 hours, crying and yelling, saying this was all my idea and Grant was brainwashed, begging Kelly to convince us to drop the charges. When Kelly told her to leave, she wouldn't. And she said if the family wouldn't help her, she'd tell the court we were both unfit parents, and she'd find witnesses. My stomach clenched, not from fear, but because she was doing it again, threatening to fabricate more, 2 hours after learning she was being charged. It was like lying was the only tool she had. Grant said it before I could. She's threatening to lie again. That's exactly why we filed. He said it quietly, but his hand was pressed flat on the counter like he was holding himself in place. Every time we thought she'd run out of moves, she found one more, and everyone was the same move dressed up differently. I called the attorney and told her everything Kelly said, word for word. She said she was filing an emergency addendum to the restraining order right then, that the voicemail plus the threats Kelly reported were direct threats to fabricate additional false claims, a pattern, exactly what judges look for in a protective order. She said the judge assigned to our case already knew the file from the criminal charge, so the addendum would go straight to them. 2 days later, she called while I sat on the living room floor with Ren on my lap. She said the restraining order had been granted, full approval, one of the fastest she'd seen, because the judge took the threats of further false reports very seriously. Yolanda was legally barred from contacting me, Grant, or coming near our home or anywhere Ren was. No calls, no texts, no showing up, no sending others with messages. If she broke it, she could be arrested. Holding my daughter on the floor, I felt something I hadn't in so long I almost didn't recognize it. Safe. There was a piece of paper with a judge's signature that said Yolanda could not come near us, but she had one card left. The next day, my phone buzzed with a group message she'd sent to everyone, Anya, Paula, Kelly, and family I hadn't spoken to in weeks. She wrote that her own son had chosen a stranger over his mother, that she was being criminally charged for loving her granddaughter, that she'd been banned from seeing her, and that if anyone had a heart, they'd talk sense into Grant before she lost everything. She called me a stranger, after years of marriage and giving birth to her grandchild. I didn't respond. Within minutes, the family she'd spent months manipulating answered for themselves. Paula wrote first, in the thread where everyone could see, that Yolanda had filed a false report saying the baby was neglected, that nobody did this to her. She did it to herself. Anya wrote that she loved her, but couldn't defend what she did, and to please get help. Kelly wrote that she'd asked Yolanda to leave her house, and she wouldn't, that she'd threatened to lie again, and that she was done. 3 women Yolanda had called crying, used as weapons against me for months, all telling her the same thing. This is on you. Yolanda didn't write back. The chat went silent. I put the phone down and walked away, because I didn't need to save those messages or add them to a folder. I just needed the truth to to reach everyone, and it had. That evening, I sat in the rocking chair in Ren's room, the lamp low and warm, Ren wrapped in the blanket with little stars on it, almost asleep. Grant appeared in the doorway and watched us, his face soft in the dim light. After a minute, he said, "She's going to be arraigned next week, my mom, in front of a judge, for what she did to us." His eyes were wet. I asked how he felt. He said, "Like I lost my mother a long time ago, and I'm just now admitting it." I didn't try to fix it. I held Ren tighter and let him feel it. She'd fallen fully asleep, her chest rising and falling, completely unaware that lawyers and police and judges had been pulled into our lives because one woman couldn't accept a name. I leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Hey, Ren." Nobody in the room tried to call her anything else.